We now begin with the English session, Indian English Writing Beyond Fiction. The position of fiction as the most dominant genre in the third world countries, its reception as the authentic representative of collectivities and nationalities, and the various aspects of its ever-growing market are the backdrop against which this session sets itself. In last few years, some extraordinary non-fiction work has come out and challenged the authority of fiction as a representative genre. Some of its best practitioners talk about the brave new world they're trying to create. The session features some exceptional young writers of non-fiction, Basharat Peer, Aman Sethi, and Annie Zaidi, along with Arshia Sattar, the renowned translator and academician. The session will be moderated by critic and novelist Chandrahas Chaudhary. Chandrahas Chaudhary is the author of the novel Arzi the Dwarf, the editor of the Anthology of Indian Literature India, a traveler's literary companion. He grew up in Bombay and his native Orissa, was educated at the universities of Delhi and Cambridge, and now lives in Delhi. His book reviews appear in The National, The Wall Street Journal, and The New York Times. He is also the fiction and poetry editor of The Karma. Over to Chandrahas.
Welcome everybody to this session. I've always thought that the word non-vegetarian was a kind of very inadequate word to describe the pleasures of meat eating, and because it doesn't assert anything positive, it just asserts what meat is not. And in the same way, I think non-fiction is also not a very useful word. I would like to begin by trying to open up for you all the various strands of work that can come under this very loose catch-all term. And in that way, we also will be introduced to the work of the people around me. So from my left, I have Arshia Sattar, who's the translator of the Ramayana, and also a book called Lost Loves, which is an interpretation of some themes of the Ramayana. Then there's Aman Sethi, who's the writer of A Free Man, book that came out earlier this year. It's set in Delhi. To my right, Annie Zaidi, the author of Known Turf, a book of essays on modern India. And then Basharat Peer, the author of Curfewed Night, a memoir of growing up in Kashmir. Well, I think my job is to make life as difficult as possible for all of you. So I will ask you, Arshia, to begin. It seems to me that a book is, it's most apparently the record of a single voice trying to address the reader on a subject. But inside it, a book is also a conversation between the writer and something, an idea, another person, maybe another book. With you, the conversation is with a figure from history, with Rama. And I read it and I was enormously impressed by how you seem to be speaking one-on-one with Rama sometimes across the centuries. Would you then like to take this idea forward of the book, and all of you in turn, of the book as a kind of conversation, a private conversation or a private idea that is then expressed in your work?
Yeah, I have to just start with a disclaimer. I actually don't know what I'm doing on this panel. First of all, I'm the only auntie here. Everybody else is under, 25.
You are the most energetic of all of us. I know that for a fact.
Thank you, Chandrahas. But it's Ramayana is very hard to place because there's so many of us who think of it as non-fiction, those of us who think of it as history, and that has one set of problems, and then there's those of us who think of it as religion, which is another set of problems, and then there's somebody like myself who thinks of it completely as literature, which is yet another set of problems. You're right, Chandrahas. I mean, I'm beginning to see more and more that Lost Loves, the book, is actually a conversation with Rama, and I think perhaps that happens to many of us, that we don't realize that we're in conversation until the book is done. We think we're writing for ourselves, we think that we're chasing an idea, but in fact we're constantly responding to something. And the only sort of nonfiction that I can lay claim to is reviews, really. And just the other day, you and I, Chandahar, sadly were celebrating the fact that there's some magazines that give us 1,200 words, yeah, to write a review. Now, the problem with that is that we're writing reviews, we're not writing essays, literary essays. And if we were writing literary essays, I think the idea of a conversation, not simply with the text that you're talking about, but even perhaps with the writer of that text, and certainly a conversation among all of us, because the literary essay gives everybody a chance to respond, rather than, you know, I think part of the reason we don't have a culture of literary essays is because we don't have dedicated book reviews. Biblio has basically folded, Caravan, thanks to you, and Anjum is, you know, giving us some space, but by and large, the conversation that you're talking about is actually becoming a soundbite, yeah? And so lost that. Sorry? You can't hear me? My mic is not very good?
Why didn't you take this? I find it extremely funny that people can't hear Ashia because it's... Why don't you take that?
I find... Okay. See, they work when I'm not holding them. So the conversation that you're suggesting is actually becoming a soundbite because we just don't have the space to write longer non-fiction literary essays. And in some sense, Lost Loves is that. It's a series of long essays that attempt to be a conversation, not simply with drama, but with the tradition of how we look at drama. Yeah?
Aman, you want to?
I suppose if I would respond to the first half of what Arsha had brought up, my book is in some ways, not in some ways, it is the biography of a man who I spent 5 years traveling with, talking to, drinking with. And the book went through many iterations. And when we finally, when I say we, I mean me and my editor, arrived at a draft that we liked, we found that what worked really well was the tension that we had managed to create between Ashraf, who is the person who the book is about, and the narrator, which is myself. And there's this sort of play that happens between the two of us, because one is trying to, in some ways, make a world more intelligible, but the act of writing about that world is also at the same time an act of learning about that world for me. So I think that, and I think this may in some ways respond to what a lot of the new writing in India has been about, that if you look at, say, Sonia Falaro's book on Beautiful Thing, which is on a Bombay bar girl, the idea is that you try and get closer to a subject, and the easy part is actually getting close to the subject. The difficult part is stripping away your own notions of how life should be led. Once you're willing to, or once you manage to strip away a certain, as they say, what would the word be? If you could strip away a certain obviousness of lifestyle and make the situation strange to yourself, that's when I think the really interesting material starts coming out. So the tension that you then try and create is you stand in for your reader. At least that's what I did when I put myself in, that I was in some ways standing in for my reader as an interpreter of a world. Now that has lots of problems, which I suppose we will explore at some point.
Why didn't you explore them now?
Well, I think some of the problems that you do face is, and I think that's true of a lot of Indian non-fiction writing in English, that by virtue of writing in English and by virtue of writing for an English readership, there are certain relationships of power that are set up almost immediately. And I think it's important to acknowledge them, because then you can, creatively or uncreatively try and work around them. But to assume that you are just a fly in the wall is, I think, false, because it's a bit like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Like, the act of viewing will automatically change the situation. So that's why I think it's important that you put yourself in there, because you're constantly then making it clear to the reader that your presence creates ripple effects, which are often not very good. I mean, they could be good, they could be bad, but usually all your characters are then in some senses performing for you. And it's only after maybe you know, maybe a year into it that people are now getting comfortable, and people are, I think you reach a point when people are comfortable ignoring you, that's when I think you're finally getting somewhere. So yeah.
And you want to say something about Known Turf. I know that it's a more broad brush portrait than a free man, which is devoted to a single person and to seeing his world. The two of you are slightly different kinds of non-fiction writers, and I would like to emphasize this difference so that you know, you have a sense of the ways in which something can be done. So you want to speak a bit about the method of Known Turf?
Does this work?
Yeah.
Okay, right. Known Turf draws very heavily upon my work, my professional work. At the time I was working with Frontline magazine, and Aman and I were colleagues there at the time. And Known Turf is, I would say, if you're going to talk about responses, what we respond to, I think Known Turf is my response to myself. Because until I came to Frontline, I was, at the risk of sounding stupid, I would like to say that I was quite stupid. I was uninformed about large swaths of my own country. I had a fairly typical middle-class protected upbringing. Journalism was taking me deeper and deeper into more and more spaces, but I had done some urban reporting. I hadn't done any rural reporting until I came to Frontline. And for me, really, I hadn't even visited my own native village until I came to Frontline. And that kind of started to open doors inside my own mind. But like all good reporters, you're taught to keep yourself out of stuff. So I kept myself out of the story. I started blogging around the same time, and my blog was called Known Turf. And that began a kind of conversation with myself, because there I allowed myself to talk about how I was feeling, what I was learning, the things that I can't possibly put into a newspaper or magazine report. And the book really came from there. So in terms of work, it is still, my material is the same as the kind of material you might find in a magazine, for the most part. Some parts of it are not, but some parts of it are. But a lot of it is just me kind of turning back and saying that, you know, so that is where I came from, and this is what I saw, and yeah, it kind of changed me in some way.